Hey everybody, I want to talk about our favorite topic, taxation. So there's one thing that I find pretty universal. People that are heading into retirement or are already in retirement need to understand it. This is those three tax classes. We can pile your money into three separate piles, okay? And it's very important that you treat those piles differently. And that's going to be really, hopefully, obvious by the time I'm done with this video. So let's jump in. The first pile of money you have is IRA money, and this is the easy one. The IRA money is treated differently because you've never paid taxes on it. This is the pile of money that includes your 401k, 403b, 457, SEP IRAs, simple plans. There's all these plans that you got to save money in without paying taxes on it. Okay, so then when you head off into retirement, the vast majority of people that do are making less money than they were in their working years. And so now your mantra is, how do I get this money out of here at the lowest taxation possible? That's always going to be your mantra the day you retire. That IRA money, the advantage is you got to stock it away without paying taxes on it. When you were in your high wage earning years in higher tax brackets, you got to avoid that taxation. Save it and grow and grow and grow and grow and never pay taxes on it. But at some point, you're going to be forced to take money out. So now, how do we get it out of the least amount? So if you avoided paying 28% taxation on it, what if you can get it out at 12% taxation? That's a heck of a savings. And that's how you can take advantage of this IRA money. So being proactive, how do I get this money out at the least amount of taxation possible? Because every penny in there you owe taxes on. And not only do you owe taxes, it's at the highest tax rate. It's at the full-blown income tax rates, not at the special tax rates like for qualified dividends and long-term capital gains. As a matter of fact, they don't exist. So upon retirement, you admit to yourself, I am going to need to pull from here every single year, and then I'm going to be forced to pull from here. If you put your head in the sand, those required minimum distributions are going to hurt you. They're going to be so big and painful. They're going to push you into higher taxation. And it's usually money that you didn't even need to fund your retirement. So be careful. Don't get stuck in that world where you're just going to ignore it. You spent your life looking at that money saying, grow, 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 save, save, save. That was your retirement nest egg. And now you're looking at it. You got to change that mantra. How do I get it out? How do I get it out? So now, oops, wrong order. Let's get these out here. Because you can't control the order of return, stable investing produces better results. Meaning you're going to be pulling from this every single year. And one thing you have to learn is that difference between putting in and taking out. Mathematically, investing changes. Turbulence is okay when you're putting in. That's why you learn things like dollar cost averaging and all those wonderful things. But when you start taking out, the math works against you, and stability is your friend. So you start pushing safe investments, stable investing strategies in here so you don't have to have it in the rest of your portfolio. Okay, very important that we understand this. We start prioritizing stability in the IRA, knowing that we're going to have to pull it out. And that's for most people, not everybody. Not everybody. If you're just going to do Roth conversions, you can have it in 100% in the stock market, no problem. If you don't need this money to fund your retirement, great, I don't have a problem with that. All stock market. But the people that are going to be using this, pulling this money out instead of just moving it from this investment account to the next investment account, the stability matters. You need those safe, stable investments in there. So there's no such thing as tax-exempt interest, long-term capital gains, qualified dividends. No one cares how your money grows in that IRA. I want to make sure we understand that. No matter how it grows, that money comes out and you owe full taxation. The only reason we have things like tax-exempt interest, long-term capital gains, qualified dividends is because of the difference of taxation in those types of things. But IRA overrides that. Doesn't matter how you invest, you will always pay full tax rates on this. Most heirs withdraw all within 10 years. So know that this is your heir's least favorite money. They're going to hate this money. And if you put your head in the sand and leave them a pile of IRA, ultimately, the world is going to have less of your money. Well, all of your heirs and yourself are going to have less of your money. The government's going to have a bigger chunk of your money. So if your idea is to be as efficient with this money as possible, you got to think about your heirs too, making sure that you're not leaving that huge tax burden, because then they're going to get blasted with taxes and lose a whole bunch of this money to the government. Okay. Next, Roth. Let's talk about Roth. Roth is the opposite of IRA. You already paid taxes on this. I see a lot of younger people doing this wrong. Look, I understand the power of compounding, but if you put it side by side, IRA versus Roth, the idea is if you're in higher taxation, defer taxation to when you can pay less taxation. It will compound its growth in an IRA, and then you work on getting it out at lower taxation when you go to retire. Versus Roth, if you're in higher taxation, you don't typically want to pay the taxes up front. You'll have less money to invest. Okay, so you have Roth money, fantastic. You're converting IRA to Roth money, fantastic. Roth money comes with different rules. First of all, obviously, everything in there is tax-free. When you go to take that money out, the growth, the withdrawals, the income, there's no tax consequences. They don't show up on your tax return. Zero taxation from the money in your Roth if you follow the rules properly. Okay, so everything is tax-free in there. So that is the first way we know that we have different rules here and we're going to treat this money differently. We can also invest differently here. You know, any of those investments that come with K1s, that's a dirty word to a lot of people that have investments. Okay, K1s, nobody likes them. Instead of a 1099, instead of a W-2, a K1 is a partial ownership of that portfolio. It's a little different than a 1099. So some of these alternative investments are terrible on taxes, but hey, in Roth, all of a sudden, they may be appropriate. Okay, they might be good investments. They're just bad on taxes. In the Roth, you don't have to worry about it. You get a K1 for an investment in a Roth, you have no need for it, right? That's the important part. So publicly traded REITs, MLPs, closed-end funds, annuities, all these things that kick out interest that are at higher taxation, you don't have to worry about the taxation in there, okay? So no taxation, doesn't matter how it grows. Kind of like IRA, it doesn't matter how it grows, but it's all taxed. In this case, it doesn't matter how it grows, but it's not taxed. That's what's nice. Plus, right now, at this point, so who knows in the future, but there are no required minimum distributions. Nobody's going to force you to take money out of here, okay? That's why this is your heir's favorite money. But the one misnomer about this money, people, because of this tax-free status, want to get super aggressive. I don't have a problem being growth-oriented in a Roth. I think it's a right idea if you want this money for way later in life or you want to give it to your heirs. It should be growth-oriented, but not to the extent of speculation. Losses hurt most here. If I had to pick an investment that went to zero, I would rather do it in my IRA account or my after-tax account. I would not do it in my Roth. It's very simple. When you lose money in your IRA, you lose the money that you lost. That's it. You hadn't paid taxes on that money yet. Okay, so you only lost the money that you lost. If you invested $100, you lost that $100. That's it. In an after-tax account, okay, the third kind of money coming up here, you already paid taxes on that $100, right? So when you lose that $100, you get to write off that loss on your tax return to recoup the taxes that you paid on that money. You actually benefit on your tax return. You get back the money you paid on your taxes. Whereas Roth, you paid taxes on that $100. You lost that $100 and you lost those taxes. You don't get to write it off on your tax return. So theoretically, that $100 loss in your IRA is now what, $120 loss in your Roth account. Okay, It is the least efficient place to pick a loser. That's the bottom line. Growth orientation is perfectly fine. You want to buy the NASDAQ fund or the ETF that owns the NASDAQ or the S&P 500. You want to be growth oriented. I don't have a problem, but you want to go pick the one biotech stock that is supposed to cure cancer but goes to zero tomorrow. That's your fault. I would rather buy the biotech fund that owns all biotech firms, or better yet, right now, buy the ETF that owns all the companies in the AI world. So that way I'm diversified enough and I don't have to worry about it going to zero. Zero is a bad thing. Losses hurt most in your Roth account. It's a great hedge against higher taxation and inflation. So for retirees that are not trying to save this money for their heirs, okay, they can look at this money and say, hey, this is really going to help me later in life as we see inflation, as we see all that. All the money in here is compounding its growth and has already been taxed. So every dollar in there is a full dollar. Whereas you look at that IRA and every dollar in there's really only 75 cents, right? So we've got to be careful about that. This money is great for later in life, but I always hate seeing people saying, oh, I can't touch it. Oh, I can't touch it. Oh, I can't touch it. And never using this Roth money and not really having heirs to give it to. If you have heirs to give it to, that is by far their favorite type of money. But they will have to take this money out over 10 years. It won't be taxable to them, but they will have to take all the money out within the 10 years. Kind of cool for the heirs, though. Think about that. They inherit some money that is tax-free, and they get to sit there and let it grow for 10 years and take it all out on that 10th year. And no taxable events. That's a pretty nice blessing you're leaving your kids. Roth is the best money to leave your kids. Okay? But if you don't have heirs to leave this to, find out a way to make this as useful as possible throughout your retirement. And I've got plenty of videos on that. Matter of fact, I do a full class on that. Multiple classes on that. It's about being efficient with your situation. And those people that are lucky enough to have Roth, there's lots of great things you can do to make Roth more useful for yourself. All right, then here's the third kind of money. Third kind of money is your after-tax non-qualified money. Okay, NQ stands for non-qualified. Trust money, after-tax money. This is all money you've paid taxes on and saved. Okay, sometimes you sell a house and you got this big pile of money. That's your after-tax money. Efficiency is the key to success here. So important. This pile of money is so unique compared to the other two. The IRA dictates the taxation. The Roth dictates no taxation. But here, each investing choice comes with different tax consequences. This is why every advisor building a portfolio or managing investments needs to understand taxation. They should know taxation. They should be able to talk about taxation because every choice they're making is causing taxation to you. This is where I get very frustrated with our industry. We can talk about taxation. We need to understand the difference between a qualified dividend and a non-qualified dividend. We need to understand the difference between interest-bearing investments and qualified dividends, or a municipal bond. This is the only place a municipal bond would ever make sense. It does not make sense in your Roth account or IRA account, ever. So in this part of your portfolio, interest is calculated at the full tax rate. So are non-qualified dividends. So are short-term capital gains. So limit interest, non-qualified dividends, and short-term capital gains. If you're trying to be efficient, I'm not saying don't invest in things that give you those. I'm saying don't invest in things that give you those in this part of your portfolio. Move them to your IRA, move them to your Roth, because they don't care about what your investment is doing, okay? So limiting interest, that means limit the amount of CDs and money market accounts and corporate bonds, okay? Those are the things we try to stay away from. We also stay away from managed mutual funds. Mutual funds that have a manager buying and selling. Okay, high turnover mutual funds, but even some of the lowest turnover mutual funds, when the pandemic hit, sold the entire portfolio. And guess what happens? Just because you bought and hold like you were supposed to do doesn't mean you're not going to owe that taxation. People that learned what mutual funds were, they had them in their IRA. That's fine. They can sell that whole portfolio and nothing happens to you. But guess what? When you have it in this after-tax part of your portfolio, you owe that taxation even though you didn't sell anything. I literally saw six-figure 1099s. That's over $100,000 in taxable events coming from client portfolios, not our clients, but people's portfolios. They came to me and said, what the heck happened? And I showed them what happened. You have an advisor that just shoves all your money in mutual funds and doesn't care about the taxation. Or in some of these people cases, they bought these 20, 30, 40 years ago and just let it sit there and grow and grow and grow without ever being proactive. This is the part of your portfolio you need to be proactive. This is where tax loss harvesting comes in. If you would have done that along the way, you would have had less exposure to this. But it's real simple. Just don't buy those types of mutual funds. An ETF, as an example, is a much better strategy because there's no active manager there buying and selling the investments within. You can own an ETF that owns the S&P 500, and they will occasionally make an adjustment because the S&P 500 dropped a company and added a company, but that's it. Pandemic hits, they're not selling the whole portfolio and causing all the taxation to you. So be very careful in this part of your portfolio with mutual funds. Or robo-traded funds, those computer-traded accounts. Can't stand those either. Active trading in this part of the portfolio is a very bad idea. Capital gains step up upon death. This is another one where, again, every client is in an absolutely individual situation. I've seen plenty of clients out there in situations where they have a big pile of after-tax savings and they've got these investments that are just sitting there growing and growing and growing. Maybe they own some Microsoft and Apple, all the seven magnificent stocks, and they just sat on them for 10 years. Well, I'm not trying to find a way to get out of them. These are big, stable companies that I'm not super worried about, and it's a reasonable portion of their portfolio. And I know if one spouse passes away and this is a joint account, the cost basis steps up. If they have no reasonable need for this money, they have such huge capital gains in there, why would we try to get out of that? We got to make sure that we're making decisions based on the individual situation. No taxation is better than managed taxation. Okay? No taxation is better than managed taxation. Managed, meaning even the most thoughtful approach of trying to get out of those positions and out of those capital gains does not beat paying no taxes. I'm sorry, it's just the reality of it. Qualified dividends and long-term capital gains are tax advantaged, right? Qualified dividends are U.S. stocks that you bought and hold for at least 90 days through the ex-dividend date, making sure that you're not churning, buying and selling. Again, those actively traded mutual funds, you can't keep them from buying and selling right after they receive the dividend. So you end up with a lot of non-qualified dividends. You're taxed at much lower tax rates for these things. Long-term capital gains, just simply buy and hold for a year. Short-term is when you sell it within the year. Municipal bonds are usually tax-free. I say usually, there's a gotcha on those. They are one of the primary triggers to the alternative minimum tax. Too much municipal bonds causes problems and you end up paying bad taxes. It defaults to 26 and 28% taxation. So stay away from that. You can have little amounts of municipal bonds, but not large amounts. Annuities are tax deferred. Tax deferred. Okay, that means somebody's got to pay the taxation. Annuities are fine with me. I don't have a problem with them when they're properly used for the purpose that they are. They can be good, powerful, wonderful investments, but the reality is the vast majority of people out there are selling them and don't really know how to use them properly. I find annuities in this part of people's portfolios, and there's no plan on when they're going to take the money out and pay taxes on. If you're trying to defer taxation, that means there's a better day in the future for you to pay those taxes. So if you're doing things for deferral, then you better have a plan on the other side. Who's going to pay those taxes? Investment subject to capital gains, step up upon death. I already said that one. There we go. So this part of your portfolio, it takes active management. It takes understanding of taxation. So important. So now let's look at this and how it applies to the portfolio. Controlling the flow is the key. All right. I always tell people once they're in retirement, try to withdraw once a year. Set yourself up for success. Right? You can control taxation better. You can make better choices on where you're pulling from, especially if you're doing this at the end of the year. I always tell people November-ish is when you want to refill that bank account. So your checking account will have all your income coming in, and you pay your bills out of there. And your savings account should have 1 year's worth of spending money plus a cushion. Okay, and there it is, refill it once a year. So I want you to look at these tax brackets. These are the new 2025 tax brackets. This includes the new enhanced standard deduction, $6,000 extra standard deduction for people over 65. There is an income phase out. So again, this is not going to be everybody's standard deduction, but boy, including that extra $6,000 for being over 65, and it's under 150,000 income for single people. The reality is you're looking at a $23,000 standard deduction. That's pretty darn good. All right. Then from 23 to 35, so about $12,000 there of income, you're going to get taxed only at 10%. And then from 35 to 72, taxed at 12%. Once you go over that, then you hit the 20s. And then once you go over that, then you're in the 30s. 30s is considered high. 20s is considered the gray area. Some people it's high, some people it's low. And then there's always considered low taxation. So married couples over here, single people over here. When you sit down once a year and refill this bank account, you're always going to want to look at this, right? Because it'll tell you where to pull from. You've got IRA money. Okay, at some point you're going to be forced to take some money out of there. So if you're forced to, that's uncontrollable income. You got to pull that. But then from there, you're strategically withdrawing. Strategically withdrawing, if you're in the 12% tax bracket, you want to utilize IRA. Roth, no, don't touch that money if you're in the 10 and 12% tax brackets. When you chance hitting the 22-24% tax bracket, to avoid that, that's when you're going to use that to refill your bank account. Use some of that Roth money to avoid the higher taxation. That is how you're going to optimize the use of this Roth. If you can avoid 22-24% taxation by taking a little bit from your Roth, you win all day long. And then there's the after-tax money. That's where those qualified dividend portfolios come in, that tax-advantaged passive income. You can always scrape the profits off of your investments in this part of the portfolio because you're going to pay taxes on those profits. When you achieve a qualified dividend, that's the profits from a U.S. company paid out into your portfolio. You're going to have to pay taxes on it, so you might as well use it to refill that bank account. Or if you have some municipal bonds, that interest you're getting out of there is tax-free. Get that in for interest into your bank account and use it, right? So then I say strategic withdrawals all throughout here. Maybe you got to buy a car and you don't want to hit your Roth too hard. Well, if you take principal from your after-tax portfolio, that's not taxable either. So when you look at this, you want to know these tax brackets. You want to know where you are, and that's why you wait till towards the end of the year. You know how much Social Security or pension or an annuity income that you're receiving throughout the year, and you can make that calculation and make wise decisions on where you're pulling your money from to refill that savings account. That's why we do it. And that helps you be as efficient as you can be. Remember, setting yourself up for success is how this makes you more efficient. You've got to have the format in your system. You've got to know the 3 piles of money that you have. You've got to have a system that you're refilling that bank account once a year for your upcoming year. So then you can go enjoy next year. Your income comes in. When you need more, you pull from your savings. And then towards the end of the year, you go refill it for the next year. Okay? I hope that helps. This is a lesson that everybody needs to learn and understand. You got to know the 3 kinds of money. You got to treat them differently. You got to know when to pull from each of them. Okay? If you didn't fill up your 12% tax bracket, then go do a Roth conversion. There's lots of things that you can do to be as efficient as you need to be. All right, if you want to talk to me for any reason, yourinvestmentcounselor.com, you can jump on there and schedule a free meet and greet on there. Always happy to talk about this stuff. Full classes at fpfeaz.org. If you don't know about those full classes, go get on those things. You can register for them. They're live via Zoom. I got a whole bunch of opportunities, and it's a different topic every single month. Certainly give us a call, like, share, subscribe, do all those wonderful things, and I appreciate you viewing. We'll see you next week.